Hi, everybody. All right, I finished reading the rest of this, so then I can send this to you in a video. So I'm on page 67 if you're in the book, and we are talking about Helmholtz Watson, how he's a little too able, right? Able was the verdict of his superiors, perhaps, and they would shake their heads, would significantly lower their voices. A little too able. Yes, a little too able, and they were right. A mental excess had produced in Helmholtz Watson effects very similar to those in which, in Bernard Marx, were the result of a physical defect. So Helmholtz is smarter than his people, right? Maybe more better looking and all those types of things, and a little too able, more so than the alpha plus that there is. Plus, he wants to be an individual. And he's able to do things on his own that like the other people may not be able to do. Like he doesn't want to like really deal with like any of that other stuff. So that's how they're similar, is that they're both individuals. Too little bone and brawn had isolated Bernard from his fellow men, and the sense of this apartness being, by all the current standards, a mental excess, became in its turn a cause of wider separation. That which had made Helmholtz so uncomfortably aware of being himself and all alone was too much ability. What the two men shared was the knowledge that they were individuals. But whereas the physical defective Bernard had suffered all his life from the consciousness of being separate, it was only quite recent that, grown aware of his mental excess, Helmholtz Watson had also become aware of his difference from the people who surrounded him. So since Bernard was born the way he was and looking different but being an alpha plus, he's always felt this sense of difference. Helmholtz Watson just realized as he was getting older how different he is from people. So it's kind of like when you have this realization that like you're not like everybody else when you're in your teens. That's kind of what he's having. Or maybe when you get in your 20s and you realize not everybody's the same. He's having that too. But Bernard's always had it. And he has like a grudge on his shoulder because he's so different. This escalator squash champion, this indefatigable lover, it was said that he had 640 different girls in under 4 years. This admirable committee man and best mixer had realized quite suddenly that sport, women, communal activities were only, so far as he was concerned, second bests. Really. And at the bottom, he was interested in something else. But in what? In what? That was the problem which Bernard had come to discuss with him, or rather, since it was always Helmholtz who did all the talking, to listen to his friend discussing yet once more. Three charming girls from the Bureau of Propaganda by synthetic voice waylaid him in his as he stepped out of the lift. "Oh, Helmholtz, darling, do come and have a picnic supper with us on the Exmoor." They clung around him imploringly. He shook his head and pushed his way through them. "No, no, no. We're not having any other man." But Helmholtz remained unshaken even by this delightful promise. "No," he repeated, "I'm busy." And he held up resolutely on his course. The girls trailed after him, and it was not until he had actually climbed into Bernard's plane and slammed the door that they gave up pursuit, not without reproaches. "Ugh, these women," he said, as the machine rose into the air. "These women," and he shook his head and frowned. "Too awful," Bernard hypocritically agreed, wishing as he spoke the words that he could have as many girls as Helmholtz did, and with as little trouble. He was seized with a sudden urgent to need to boast. I'm taking Lenina Crown to New Mexico with me, he said in a tone as casual as he could make it. Are you? Said Helmholtz, with a total absence of interest. Then after a little pause, this last week or two, he went on, I've been cutting all my committees and all my girls. You can't imagine what a hullabaloo they've been making it out at the college. Still, it's been worth it, I think. The effects, he hesitated, well, they're odd. They're very odd. The physical shortcomings could produce a kind of mental excess. The process, it seemed, were reversible. Mental excess could produce for its own purposes the voluntary blindness and deafness and deliberate solitude and artificial impotence of asceticism. The rest of the short flight was accompanied in silence. And when they had arrived and were comfortably stretched out on the pneumatic sofas in Bernard's room, Helmholtz began again, speaking very slowly. Did you ever feel, he asked, as though you had something inside you that was only waiting for you to give it a chance to come out? Sort of like an extra power that you aren't using, like all the water that goes down the falls instead of through the turbines. He looked at Bernard questioningly. You mean all the emotions one might be feeling if things were different? Helmholtz shook his head. No, not quite. I'm thinking of a queer feeling I sometimes get. A feeling that I've got something important to say and the power to say it, only I don't know what it is. And I can't make use of the power. If there was some different way of writing, or else something else to write about. He was silent. And then, you see, he went on at last, I'm pretty good at inventing phrases. The sort of words that suddenly make you jump, almost as though you sat on a pin. They seem so new and exciting, even though they're about something hypnopedically obvious. But that doesn't seem enough. It's just not enough for the phrases to be good. What you make with them ought to be good, too. But your things are good, Helmholtz. Oh, as far as they go, Helmholtz shrugged his shoulders. But they go such a little way. They aren't important enough, somehow. I feel I could do something much more important. Yes, a more intense, more violent. But what? What is there more important to say? And how can one be violent about sort of things one's expected to write about? Words can be like x-rays if you use them properly. They'll go through anything. You read and you're pierced. That's one of the things I try to reach my students, how to write piercingly. But what on earth's the good of being pierced by an article about community sing or the latest improvement of the scent organs? Besides, you can make words really piercing, like very hard as x-rays, when you're writing about a sort of thing. Can you say something about nothing? That's what finally it boils down to. I try and I try. Hush, said Bernard suddenly, and lifted his warning finger, and they listened. I believe there's someone at the door, he whispered. Helmholtz got up, tiptoed across the room, and with a sharp, quick movement, flung the door wide open. And there was, of course, nobody there. I'm sorry, said Bernard, feeling and looking uncomfortably foolish. I suppose I've got things on my nerves a bit. When people are suspicious with you, you start being suspicious with them. He passed his hand across his eyes and sighed. His voice became plaintive. He was justifying himself. If you knew what I'd have to put up with recently, he said almost tearfully, and the uprush of his self-pity was like a fountain suddenly released. If you only knew! Helmholtz Watson listened with a certain sense of discomfort. Poor little Bernard, he said to himself, but at the same time he felt rather ashamed for his friend. He wished Bernard would show a little more pride. It's the end of chapter 4.